As many of you are likely aware, it is very common for militaries to be compared by particular elements that they employ, for example, their primary MBT or air supremacy fighter. While it might seem that this form of comparison is shallow and unable to encompass the complexity that makes a military effective, the dream of achieving outward prestige has been a driving force of many choices within history. This is particularly apparent within the naval sphere, with many navies developing worldwide reputations based on their inventory and even costly naval arms races that defined national economies. Prior to and after World War I, this competition primarily focused on the procurement of new battleships and the perpetual cycle of one-upping the competition. This was shown during the Anglo-German and the South American dreadnought races, seeing the creation of some of the most powerful ships of their time. However, the events of the First and Second World Wars would dramatically shift the focus of procurement from the battleship to the aircraft carrier, which had become a worldwide sensation due to the type's ability to wreak havoc on enemy fleets and project power far from home waters. The carrier had become and remains today the ultimate token of prestige, and in the eyes of many admirals is the goal of any self-respecting navy to possess. The subject of today's video was a result of a long-standing competition between two nations and, despite being relatively obscure, remains unique in history as one of the 4 South American aircraft carriers to have seen service, the Argentine ARA Veinticinco de Mayo. The story of the ARA Veinticinco de Mayo, ARA standing for Armada de República Argentina, or Navy of the Republic of Argentina, began during the Second World War in the yards of Camillard as the 4th ship in the British Colossus-class light carrier. As with many nations during the war, the Royal Navy came to realize the growing importance of aircraft carriers, but faced a significant issue with the time and resources required to produce these ships. Fleet carriers, the most well-known type, offer the greatest benefits in their ability to store, repair, and receive scores of aircraft. Ships such as the American Yorktown class could hold up to 90 but require massive yards and years to produce. This led to the creation of the escort carrier, which were able to be converted from civilian designs and lighter warships, but had the disadvantage of carrying a much smaller amount of aircraft and often did not have the facilities for repairing the aircraft and could not receive many due to the small flight deck. Both fleet carriers and conversions were deemed unacceptable by the Admiralty, citing that neither were the most effective or economical option. Instead, it was decided that they would take another approach towards the solution. In 1941, the concept of aircraft destroyers was proposed, with a focus on ships that would focus exclusively on carrying fighter aircraft for defensive fleets. The name did not refer to the ships themselves destroying aircraft, but rather acting like the older type of ships that would protect fleets by engaging torpedo boats. The first design for an aircraft destroyer was based on the escort carrier HMS Audacity, which, as you can expect, lacked the necessary facilities. Due to the influence of another school of thought, the dual-purpose school, which wanted ships that were able to be hybrids of carriers and cruisers or battleships, the following designs incorporated guns and armor, but were entirely unacceptable as well. Due to the losses of Force Z in the Indo-Pacific, the need for a fighter carrier was recognized and cemented as the next plan of action. In January of 1942, the first requirement for a fighter support ship was passed, and the first proposal in response saw a ship that had a 600-foot flight deck, a single 14.6-foot, 4.45-meter high hangar with 2 lifts, capacity for 15 fighters, and a top speed of 25 knots. While the general design was acceptable, the Admiralty requested further development, and by March of 1942, the general design of the ships was accepted and the first 3 were ordered. This final design saw an increase in hangar height to 17.6 feet, 5.36 meters, and in the flight deck length to 690 feet, 210.3 meters. In addition to these, the design team used the knowledge of both military and civilian designers in order to devise a ship that could be built in yards that had not been used for warship construction, greatly improving the build times. For example, HMS Venerable was laid down in December of 1942, launched in December of 1943, and finally completed in January of 1945, compared to the fleet carrier HMS Implacable that had 3 years between just laying down and launch. In addition to this quick build time, this class of carriers only cost about £2.5 million, much less than a fully completed fleet carrier. Despite making a carrier that was much lighter and cheaper than a standard fleet carrier, the designers were successful in making a ship that was no less capable. The 342-foot, 102-meter long by 52-foot, 15.8-meter wide hangar gave a carrying capacity of more than 40 aircraft and was designed to accommodate any aircraft in service with the Royal Navy at the time. It was also given extensive safety features such as asbestos curtains to separate each of the 4 sections from fire and airlocks for ventilation. Like in the fleet carriers, each ship was equipped with a hydraulic catapult towards the forward section of the flight deck, greatly improving flight operations. Almost immediately after commissioning, the combination of their flight operation capabilities and storage facilities saw them being modified to increase the assigned crew and air group sizes from around 1,000 crew to 1,336 and upwards of 50 aircraft. The increase in number and types of aircraft carried saw the designation of these ships changed from fighter carriers to light fleet carriers to signify their unique position within the fleet. Out of the planned 16 carriers, only 8 were completed to the Colossus standard, while 5 others were completed as part of the Majestic subclass. Despite their quick building times, none of the carriers would be finished in time to see frontline action during World War II, but many would be involved in the Korean War and Suez Crisis. While these ships would not be able to make a name for themselves in the war, the class as a whole would be unique in that they would be one of the most widely purchased British warship designs ever, seeing service in 7 foreign navies for decades to come, defying the original design life expectations. One of these ships would be the HMS Venerable, noted earlier for being the quickest built in the class, the very subject of today's video. Due to her commissioning in January of 1945, the ship would not see an eventful career within the Royal Navy. Expected to take part in landing operations in the invasion of Japan, the ship was assigned to training duties shortly after commissioning in the Mediterranean to prepare her air crews before sailing to the Pacific and arriving in Australia in July. With the surrender of Japan in August, plans for supporting the invasion of Japan were scrapped, and she was instead sent to Hong Kong in order to eliminate the remaining Japanese resistance in the territory. From the 31st of August to the 2nd of September, Venerable and the carrier Indomitable provided air cover for the fleet from forces that included Shinyo suicide boats and assisted with the destruction of other naval assets around the island. Following the conclusion of hostilities, she would be involved with repatriation activities around Asia. She underwent refitting during the entirety of 1946 and returned to the United Kingdom in March of 1947, where she would unexpectedly be caught in the downsizing of the Royal Navy and mothballed with plans for disposal. With her short life seemingly coming to an end, she was given a second chance at life in an unexpected form. The Royal Netherlands Navy looking to replace the escort carrier HRMS Karel Doorman, which was procured in 1946 on loan. For the Dutch, their time as a colonial power was coming to an end with their ongoing conflict in Indonesia following the war, and the incorporation of a large carrier such as Venerable would give the Dutch a renewed sense of relevance at sea. In April of 1948, Venerable would be purchased for 27 million guilders and, amusingly enough, be commissioned as the HRMS Karel Doorman and would make her way to her new home port of Rotterdam. From 1948 to 1949, the ship would mainly be involved in exercises that would be broken up by refurbishment periods to improve her crew quarters and other miscellaneous features. Following the conclusion of her training, her early Dutch career would mainly involve taking part in NATO exercises until she was sent to undergo an intense modernization from 1955 to 1958. Similar to other navies during this time, such as the US Navy, the Doorman would see a modernization for transition into the new jet age. This took place at Wilton Feyenoord at a cost of 39 million guilders, which immediately got the attention of the government due to the cost being 12 million more than the ship was purchased for just 10 years prior. The most notable changes to the ship involved the island and the flight deck, resembling the projects of the US Navy at the time. With the advent of jet aircraft and their increased adoption during the late 40s, the concept of the angled flight deck was devised as a way to make carriers more efficient. The main idea was that these types of aircraft would normally require the entire length of the deck on normal carriers, so the angle provided a way for the jets to land while also leaving the forward section free for takeoff operations to happen simultaneously. Another benefit was that if a plane was not stopped by the arrestor wires, they could quickly take off again for another go-around. This was a necessity for the Dutch, who were adopting the British Seahawk, and as such, the Doorman was modified to sport a new 165.8 meter, 544 foot angled deck along with arresting wires. In addition to the new deck, her catapult was also refitted with a British steam system that was capable of launching aircraft at speeds of 124 miles per hour, 200 kilometers an hour, compared to her previous system that could do so at only 76 miles per hour, 122 kilometers an hour. When it came to the island, the changes here were primarily to improve her sensor suite with domestic Dutch radars. Most conspicuous was the new lattice mast mounted just forward of the funnel, which supported the LW-1 long-range air search radar sporting a range of 140 nautical miles, 260 kilometers, the DA-1 medium-range air surface search radar with a range of 50 nautical miles, 90 kilometers, and the TACAN system that helps with the aircraft navigation seen at the very top. Mounted on the exhaust funnel was a LW-2 radar, which had the same transmitter and range as the LW-1, but in a smaller mounting. The two vertically standing dishes seen above the pilot house and at the rear of the island were the VI-1 fire control radars that were used for guiding the fire of the ship's newly mounted 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns. Finally, she also received a very small ZW-1 radar mounted just forward of the VI-1 that was used as a medium-range surface search system with a range of 50 nautical miles, 90 kilometers. Following modernization, Doorman had rightfully cemented her position as the pride of the Dutch Navy and one of, if not the most modern carriers within Europe. Unfortunately for the ship, however, this position would not protect her from the disastrous year of 1959, where she had multiple accidents leading to the death of multiple crew members. January of that year saw the crash of one of her aircraft near Bermuda, August saw the death of a crewman in a fire in Rotterdam, September saw the collision with the Belgian ship Frans Elza, and just before the conclusion of the year, a Seahawk crashed with the pilot dying as a result. The following year, she was sent as part of the Dutch involvement in the Indonesia-Nieuw-Guinea crisis that saw the fledgling Republic of Indonesia attempting to lay claim to western New Guinea. The carrier was stationed off the coast, where she primarily stayed as part of a show of the flag operation, but eventually the conflict was resolved with the annexation of western New Guinea into Indonesia without much involvement from Doorman. Following the loss of yet another colonial possession, the Dutch were forced to reevaluate their presence on the world's oceans, and during the early 60s, the Doorman was modified to become an anti-submarine warfare carrier with a focus on defending local waters from the Soviets. This included a new air group made up of aircraft such as the Grumman S-2 Tracker and Sikorsky S-58 helicopter. She would participate in NATO exercises until 1968, when a major boiler fire erupted and caused significant damage. It seemed that the ship was practically at death's doorstep until yet another navy came along wishing to replace their current carrier, this time from the distant land of Argentina. Funnily enough, the ship that the Argentines were looking to replace was Doorman's sister, Warrior, which had been purchased from the British in 1958 and renamed Independencia. Despite this ship having been modernized by the British in a similar fashion to Doorman, it was found that her flight facilities, primarily her catapult, were not sufficient for the operation of jet aircraft and had been restricted to the usage of aircraft such as the American Corsair and AT-6 Harvard for the previous 10 years. The Argentine Admiralty had decided upon procuring a ship similar to the Independencia, and coincidentally, the Karel Doorman had been put out of service due to the aforementioned boiler fire. Despite the damage, she was sold to the Argentines for 9.5 million guilder, with a part of the purchase requiring a refit in the Wilton Feyenoord shipyard using spare boilers and turbines from the incomplete HMS Leviathan. She would formally commission into the Argentine Navy in September of 1969, becoming the ARA Veinticinco de Mayo, Spanish for the 25th of May, named after the May Revolution in 1810 that saw the separation of Argentina from Spain. A month later, the ship would embark on a long journey to Argentina and later that year would start her first flight operations. In 1970, she would become the flagship of the Navy and formally replace her sister as the primary aircraft carrier of Argentina. In 1972, she would acquire her new complement of jet aircraft, specifically American A-4B Skyhawks, and in the following years participated in exercises with the United States and Brazil until 1978 when she was part of the task force sent to Tierra del Fuego during the Beagle conflict between Chile and Argentina. Chile and Argentina had been at odds with each other over the ownership of the islands within Tierra del Fuego since the early 1900s, with minor clashes happening through the years. However, it was not until the late 1970s that a major war nearly started. In 1977, the United Kingdom had mediated the islands of Picton, Nueva, and Lennox to the Chileans, and naturally, this angered the Argentines. In response to this decision, the Argentine military developed Operation Soberanía, or Sovereignty, which was a naval invasion within Tierra del Fuego to expel Chilean forces from the region in December of 1978. As the flagship of the Argentine Navy, Mayo was to be the dominant asset in the region and be a major component as the headquarters of helicopter and naval landing operations. Just as the landings were to begin, the operation was recalled due to the intervention by the Vatican, and Mayo joined other Argentine forces in returning to their homeland. While Mayo may have not found herself to be part of a major clash between two nations in December of 1978, the same could not be said for an infamous conflict only a few years later that would see her facing against the nation which had built her. Just prior to Operation Soberanía in 1976, Argentina experienced a military coup that saw the creation of a junta named the National Reorganization Process. It was during this period that the nation saw significant economic decline, to the point that by the early 80s, it was apparent to its leaders that they were going to lose their control over the nation. Needing a distraction for the population away from their poor handling of the economy and other factors, the junta's eyes turned to another subject of drawn-out territorial disagreements: the British archipelago about 364 nautical miles, 675 kilometers, off the coast of Argentina, the Falkland Islands. Expecting little to no military response from the British, and due to the great distance that the Royal Navy would have to travel with a reaction force, the invasion of the Falklands was ordered on the 2nd of April 1982. Just prior to the war, the ship was once again given a refit that included reinforcement of her flight deck in order to accommodate the operation of Argentina's newest attackers, the Dassault Breguet Super-Étendard, which became infamous for their activities during the war. These aircraft would not be delegated to Mayo, however, due to the inability for her catapult system to effectively launch them. This left the ship only having a carrier air wing of A4Q Skyhawk and ASW-oriented S2E tracker fixed-wing aircraft, along with SH-3D Sea King and Aerospatiale Alouette 3 helicopters. This and the age of her propulsion machinery, being from a 1945 vintage donor carrier, hampered her operational usefulness in the war. Despite her lack of significant speed, Mayo was to be at the center of a bold operation planned to be the decisive analog to the Battle of Midway that saw the destruction of the Japanese carriers during World War II. Recognizing the soon arrival of the British task force from the home islands and the inferiority of the Argentine Navy, Chief of Naval Operations Vice Admiral Juan Lombardo decided that a sneak attack during the early morning of May 2nd would be the most effective method of neutralizing the enemy. The group charged with conducting this operation was Task Force 79, made up of 3 different sections. Veinticinco de Mayo was flagship of TG 79.1 and was escorted by the destroyers Centésima Trinidad, Hercules, and P to approach from the north. Task Force 79.4 consisted of the corvettes Drummond, Corico, and Granville, and Task Force 79.3 consisted of the light cruiser General Belgrano and her escorts that were to approach from the south. Using her position north of the British fleet, 6 of Mayo's Skyhawks were to deliver the initial blows to the British fleet using 500-pound, 226.7 kilogram bombs with a goal of sinking a British carrier. Following this strike, the 3 corvettes from Task Force 79.4 were to steam in and utilize the short range of British search radar, around 20 nautical miles or 37 kilometers, and their small size to approach close enough to launch exocet missiles and escape before any chance of response. Finally, General Belgrano and her escorts were to approach from the south as the lower part of a pincer movement and mop up any remaining British ships. The most challenging part of the mission was that of the Skyhawks, whose success determined the fate of the entire operation. In the preparation phase, it was determined that only 4 would be able to drop their bombs, and only 2 would be able to return. Even this was not certain due to the British fleet consisting of multiple missile-armed ships, such as the Sheffield-class destroyer and Broadsword-class frigate. As the anxious yet determined pilots prepared for the attack, nature would have other plans. There was no wind whatsoever in the area. Even when given lighter bomb loads, the Skyhawks were unable to take off without substantial wind, and to make matters worse, one of the trackers launched by Mayo earlier that night to locate the British had brought enemy aircraft straight to the fleet. Following the failure of their surprise attack, the Argentine Navy was forced to abandon hopes of being able to counter the British naval presence. Their inferiority was cemented by the sinking of the General Belgrano on May 2nd by the submarine HMS Conqueror, who had torpedoed the cruiser outside of the total exclusion zone, a zone established around the Falklands mainly patrolled by nuclear-powered attack submarines in order to establish naval dominance and area denial. The danger of British submarines had become abundantly clear to Argentine commanders, and it was rightfully feared that Mayo was the next target. From this point forward, the Argentine Navy had become focused on anti-submarine warfare, and Mayo returned to the duties she was originally modified for by the Dutch in the 60s. For the remainder of the war, Mayo would be escorted by the 2 Type 42 destroyers mentioned earlier, Centésima Trinidad and Hercules, and the old Gearing-class destroyer P. In terms of aircraft, ironically, the carrier that was purchased in order to allow Argentina to operate jets at sea was getting the most work out of her piston-engined S-2 trackers for submarine hunting. Utilizing their unique AN/AQA-4A tracking computer tied to passive-sounding LOFAR, meaning low-frequency analysis and recording sonobuoys, these aircraft were capable of a monitoring quadrant of 40 by 60 nautical miles, 74 by 111 kilometers. If a submarine was to be found by one of the aircraft, they would drop one of 2 Mark 44 anti-submarine torpedoes carried in the bomb bay at an altitude of 300 to 900 feet and parachute down into the water. It would then use active sonar to find a target within a range of 3,300 feet, about a kilometer, starting to emit a rapid pulse if it had found a lock and continue the pulse until it hit. The pilots would also have the option of FFAR rockets mounted to the wings or depth charges. In addition to the trackers, Mayo also utilized her Sea King helicopters that were armed with sonobuoys, torpedoes, and depth charges. For the crew of the Mayo, their time during the war was essentially a never-ending sense of unrest due to the constant threat of British submarines ready to make their ship the next Belgrano. According to Mariano Sciaroni, many sailors started to take mattresses to their battle stations so that they would be either ready to react or to abandon ship. From the sinking of the Belgrano to the end of the war, the men of Task Force 79 would be in a perpetual cat-and-mouse game involving multiple sightings of periscopes and sonar pings that would eventually lead nowhere. On the 5th of May, one of Mayo's trackers detected and engaged a potential submarine target with a torpedo. To their surprise, the torpedo started to engage in its rapid pulse stage, meaning that it had identified a target. The only problem was that the torpedo eventually stopped, likely due to running out of power, and no explosion was heard. The only change was the sound of what the sonar operator believed to be machinery, with the ocean becoming completely silent. At first, it was believed that the target attacked was HMS Splendid, but her logbooks disagree with the assessment, leaving the mystery submarine's identity to remain unknown to this day. However, according to the Argentines, they were successful in identifying and engaging the 15-year-old diesel-electric submarine HMS Onyx with one of the trackers, but this claim is disputed by the British, as well as multiple accounts of Argentine units engaging the submarine and claiming to have caused damage. Due to the deterioration of the war for Argentina and the carrier's age starting to cause issues while at sea, Mayo was ordered to return to her home port of Puerto Belgrano and arrived on the 10th of May. Despite being unsuccessful at her assigned missions, it can be argued that she was able to accomplish a great propaganda victory, denying the British the sinking of the pride of the Argentine Navy in the form of this carrier, as well as remaining a constant and credible threat to their superiority under the waves. Following the conclusion of the war, the beginning of the end for the ship was starting to become apparent. Despite being once again modified for the usage of super-étendards in 1983, by 1986 the constant issues with her machinery left her entirely unable to leave port. In 1988, it was planned to give her another chance at life with a modernization that would have seen her receiving a completely new propulsion system and electronics, but this did not proceed due to economic issues. From 1989 to 1997, she would exist only to be cannibalized for parts for her sister ship Vengeance, who had been serving with the Brazilians as Minas Gerais since 1960. It was eventually decided that Veinticinco de Mayo would be sold for scrap, and with no one to save her this time, she was towed to India and her long life finally ended in late 2000, arguably a fate worse than sinking. So what do you think of the story of this ship of many nations? Let us know down in the comments, and be sure to drop suggestions for future topics you want to see. Don't forget to also hit the subscribe button and like the video while you're down there so you won't miss future uploads, including some looks inside some surviving museum ships and more topics like this one. Thanks as always for watching, and I hope to see you back on the next episode of Sails and Salvos.